Edge conversation not to be missed.
We are women of the world. We're from the east, south, north, and west.
Hi, I'm Danny Glover, and you are tuned into WPFW Washington, your station.
Welcome to On the Margin with Ethelbert Miller. My guest today is Nancy Garruba. Nancy Garruba is the author of a new novel, The Vanishing of Rose B. The book is published by Serving House Books, located in Raleigh, North Carolina. How are you doing this morning, Nancy?
I'm fine, Ethelbert. Happy to be here with you.
Okay, well, I want to ask you some questions because I was very excited. Nancy Garruba has a novel, and so I was very excited when I got this. But talk about how long it took you to write this book. Where did the story idea come from? Was it difficult for you to, overcome certain obstacles in terms of just the discipline of writing a novel?
Okay, well, let's see which question to tackle first. Um, this is not the first novel I've written. It's the first novel that I've had published.
Hmm.
So I had written two novels previously, and I've been doing this since roughly 2002. So almost 25 years, writing away without having work in the world. Um, and so I was used to the solitude, used to the effort that was required, and learned a lot about the process of writing. So, so when I write, I don't know exactly what it's going to be. In fact, I did not sit down to write what became a novel. I always start with fragments, and I keep a notebook, and I have fragments, and I never really know where they're going to take me or what they're going to be. I often think about it as though I'm taking a walk in a woods and I'm
Hmm.
collecting stones and branches and twigs and bringing them back and collecting them and collecting them. And then at some point, I think, okay, so how will I give these things some shape?
Hmm.
And that's what happened with all my books and particularly this one. Um, so this particular novel, I began to write in 2016 and finished it in 2023. So you've got 7 years there.
Hmm.
And I at first thought it was going to be either a novella or a long story. The book, as you know, is in two major sections. The first section is, well, first of all, it involves twin sisters. And I'll just talk a little bit about the background for those who don't know the book.
Well, we're gonna get
Oh,
into
you're going to
that.
do that.
Right, right.
Okay, you're
But I
going to get
want
into
to,
that.
well, let's go back up to what happened to
Sure.
those other two books? Okay. You had,
Oh, okay.
could you
Yes.
not find a publisher? Or did you get tired? Did you just give up? You say it's not going
So
anywhere?
what so what happened with the first book, which I wrote between 2001 and 2008, is that I actually did have interest from several small indie presses. And for one reason or another, they just never made the decision to publish it. So I'd go from one to the other, and they never explained why. So I
Right,
don't know about that. And then I wrote a second, and that first book is still very dear to me. But I obviously because it was my first, but
right.
Then I wrote a second, which when I went into writing it, I considered it to be a kind of experiment.
Hmm.
And in the end, and that took me another 5 years. So then afterwards, when I would look back at that book, I decided that the experiment wasn't really satisfying to me, that it really wasn't my voice.
Now you just said something that would be very interesting to our listeners. You talk about a body of time, like 5 years, 7 years. Some people like, okay, I want to finish this novel next week.
Doesn't work that way. Maybe for some people it does, but I don't know
Right,
any of those people.
right.
So I put it away and it's in a drawer and I don't ever think I will publish it. I don't want to. It just doesn't
Mm,
represent me as a writer. It was an experiment.
right.
And the thing is that this book, which I feel is very much in my voice, is this sort of book that I want to continue to write. I could not have come to this point without having written the first two.
Okay, well, let's get into this book. I found that your book examines the role of women in our society. Rose is that woman that I feel is comes after World War II, who decides to join the workforce. She begins as a secretary and works her way up to be an office manager. Talk about the women of the 1950s and early 1960s.
Well, so this is what's so interesting about this generation of women is that many of them were in the workforce during the war,
Hmm.
and they were encouraged to be part of the workforce, whether they were working in factories or whether they were working in the office. And of course, as we know, when the men came back home from the war, they were encouraged to return to that home and to forsake their jobs and to have raise children and be happy at home. And in fact, Glamour magazine, which is mentioned in my book, was a big, big magazine back then with a huge readership. It used to originally when it was first created was called Glamour, Hollywood Glamour. And in 1943, the name was changed to Glamour, simply Glamour, with a subtitle for the girl with a job.
The
Not
girl with a
the
job.
woman with a
The
job, but for
girl
the
with a job.
girl with a job. Right?
Right.
And then all of that changed after the war. So many of these women did not go back to the home as Rose, and many of the women chose not to get married and have children.
No, no, let's them. Are there women in your family, like your mother, aunts, that are your models for these stories?
So Rose is a composite of a number of women that I have known, including my mother and her friends, and then um, women in the neighborhood, women that, the mothers of my girlfriends, and then some of the stories that are told in the book are composites or existed as fragments of stories that I heard, didn't necessarily witnessed, but heard. Um, there's a lot that, in my experience, that the women, the older women, the adult women in my life would talk about with little girls in the room, thinking that we weren't paying attention. We were paying attention.
Taking notes.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So, so there was this subpopulation of working women, semi-professional women, who were the buyers of fashion. It was very important for them to, um, enter the office world with a certain degree of sophistication.
Hmm.
Um, and they were always paid less than their male colleagues, not as respected as their male colleagues. And that's the way it was.
And that hasn't changed either when you look at, women in the WNBA, or those women soccer players, they could play
Right.
like pay us what you owe us,
Right,
and that
exactly.
hasn't changed a lot. You know, talking about these women, in your book, The Vanishing of Rose B, Nancy Gruber, you have Jacqueline Kennedy plays a key role. She's this I feel like
Mhm.
this new image of a woman to copy. What does the symbolism of the pink pillbox hat, because when we go back to that era, it's like she's this woman is an elegant woman, and there's a whole style, it's Camelot, all of this stuff is happening. But what's is happening to women in terms of the pillbox hat?
So it was very because of Jackie Kennedy's wearing it and wearing it the day that the president was assassinated, that pink pillbox became an icon for that generation, for that era. And it was, you know, before the assassination, she was wearing pillbox hats. She had a number of pillbox hats, and so they were the rage.
Mhm,
Um, when I think of that era, I always think and I think of fashion in that era. I think of the pillbox hat.
mhm,
So in choosing to have Rose purchase a pillbox hat, that was strategic on my end, wanting to raise the the memory of that era. For me, I've always associated the era. That was one of the things I've always associated the era with.
But you said something just a minute ago. You said, okay, this is a hat. that she was wearing when John Kennedy was assassinated. So
Right.
what if I took that point from what you just said in this interview, I'm now looking at how the violence that's in your book, it's sort of, it's sort of equated with that. That's, with she loses the hat, off her head, and then she puts the hat somewhere that it's kept away from her. So
Yes.
is that something that you were constantly working on?
No, I'm glad you raised that point, Ethelbert. That's really perceptive. I was thinking of the hats purely as an iconic image, but you're right in the fact that Rose is wearing it on on the evening of the violent incident, and then she puts it away. It's clearly what you're saying, and I love what you're saying, is that the memory of the violence had to be put away. It had to be out of sight. It was too
Mm.
painful to confront.
But
She could
even though
not wear that hat again.
right. But even though you say that, and you just said that, we know that when we get to the last page of your book, of your novel, you say this is like a stain. Okay. So, the
Mhm.
stain, when I think of the stain, I think of how people at one time, if you said Dallas as a city, it had like a stain. This is where the
Right.
president, our young president, the Camelot, he was killed in Dallas, Texas, not LA, but Dallas.
Right, right. Well, one of the things that's not explicitly stated in the two accounts that the sisters give of what happened that evening,
Hmm.
they're slightly different, but neither one of them explicitly states that there was blood on the hat.
Hmm.
And that's but there is in Frances's account, she talks about being in this, seeing red, seeing this flash of red, and she wants to know, did you see it also, Claire? Which Claire, of
Hmm.
course, Claire never answers that question because she's not there to hear the story.
Right.
Um, but it's pointing to the fact, without stating it, that there was blood on the hat that Rose afterwards tried to get out. She tried to wash that stain out of the hat.
Right. When you were talking a few minutes ago, and I know you have this interest in photography, we were talking about these images of Jacqueline Kennedy. When you are writing, are you looking at photographs? Does that play a key role in terms of the visual way you approach a text?
Well, so this is where it gets really kind of interesting for me. While I was writing the book, I was also
Oh,
making
okay.
photographs of some of my mother's clothes from that era. And so in a way, I was doing what Claire does in the book. And that was at
Mm,
the time when I was writing the first section of the book, not knowing whether it was going to be a novel or a novella. And I was writing from
hmm.
Frances's point of view only.
I see.
So I would go from my desk, I'd be writing, and then when I took a break, I would be taking photographs. And when I came up with the idea of using the pillbox, my own mother didn't have a pillbox, so I didn't have one. So I actually bought one online from Etsy that I could photograph because I had been thinking that I would include photographs within the novel or within the story, within the novella. And in the end, I decided to not do that. It would be a
So
distraction.
where this is radio, so people can't see this, but where did the shoes come from that's on the cover?
So also from Etsy, because
Uh,
I had written the scene about the beach and the hurricane and the family being at the beach. And I wanted in the story for Rose to be wearing sandals of some sort. When I
hmm.
saw those sandals, I thought, aha, they're perfect. So while I was writing the fiction, the portfolio of photographs that I was in the process of assembling was also becoming a fiction.
Hmm. This is interesting. Talk about, okay, at the center of your book are the twins Claire and Francis. We were talking about you using photographs and stuff. Did you go out and talk to twins just to get a sense of what's going on? The twins run in your family, and then also, how important is that Francis is an architect, but also a writer, and Claire is a photographer? Because it seems as if these different disciplines is what they affects how they see their parents.
Right, you're right about that. So first about the twins. I know twins,
Are you a
but
twin?
No, I'm not a twin and I don't have a sister. But I wanted them to be twin when I decided to write from Claire's point of view as well. Um, I knew that they had to be twins as opposed to sisters maybe a couple of years apart. In fact, my editor asked me about that. Do they really need to be twins? Why can't they be 18 months apart? And I
Hmm.
said, yes, they need to be twins. They need to have come out of the womb, within a minute of each other. They need to have been very engaged with each other. In the early years, when they're children, when there's trouble in the house, they go to each other's beds and they seek comfort from each other. Um, so it had to be important that they were very attached to each other, which would make their future estrangement even more dramatic, that they would go in such different directions. Not professionally, it would be, the least important. More importantly was the fact that emotionally they grew very far apart. And so their coming together to sort through their mother's clothes is a
Well,
very
let's look at the clothes because many times clothes plays a key role in terms of twins because sometimes the parents dress them alike. And so there's this whole thing of clothes a certain
right.
way where, okay, I don't want to wear these clothes anymore because I want to have my own identity. So it seems as if in your book, clothes is also a way that's linked to identity of the woman.
That's right. And so to make things even more difficult, both girls, when they're young, look like their mother. They're like mirror images of their mother. And the mother wants them to dress alike. It's sort of, reflective of her own taste.
Hmm. But
Um,
Francis is the one that doesn't care for this.
Not at all, exactly. And the fact that they have these dresses that the book opens with the talk about dresses that they've had made for them for an upcoming recital. One girl plays the violin, the other plays the piano, and they make their mother promise that it'll be the last time they have to dress alike, and
Hmm.
then they end up switching dresses. Um, so they're you know
That
they're
sounds like
they
something. That sounds like something that would happen in a Disney movie.
Perhaps, the thing is they switch dresses in advance of the recital. And then there's a scene in Claire's section where they dress in their mother's clothes as 13-year-olds and
Hmm.
put on her jewelry and her makeup. And so again, Claire feels perfectly comfortable looking like her mother. And Frances says, no, this is not a good idea. I do not want to be like mom.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. You know, your book made me think about a question that I think is important. How much do children ever know about their parents?
And that's a great question.
How
I
much do you
think
know
that
about your parents?
well, I'll just speaking for myself,
Hmm.
the older I am, the more I see and understand. It's like walking along a path and turning around and looking at those two people who were my parents at the age I am now and realizing all that I did not understand because I'm walking more in their shoes.
Hmm.
Having been a mother, having had a partner, a husband, having had a child.
Hmm.
And I appreciate the context in which they were living more than I could ever have in an earlier period of my life.
Mm. Well, let's go back to because we were talking about these women of the 40s and 50s. If you look up, these are women in which the backdrop is a war. So unless you experience this where, the men are going to fighting and you don't know if your husband's coming back, whole or whatever, or coming back at all, that shapes a consciousness. Or a woman who comes through the depression where there's no food to eat.
Right. That's right. And both my parents came through that period of the Depression. Um, yeah.
Well, the other question that I have, which is linked to this, how much do children know about their parents? Um, what and it seems like in every family there are secrets that are kept within the family.
Yes.
and that if, for example,
Yes.
you are the writer coming into that family, sometimes, it's a question, okay, are you going to expose all this information to the public? I remember, Nancy Gruber, I went up to this conference called, Writers at Work in Utah,
Hmm.
Park City. And it was very interesting because these were Mormon women, who were wanted to be writers, and all of a sudden they're writing stories about being like wife number five. And what was
Hmm.
very interesting, one of the women there became very prominent and had movie offers. And all of a sudden, as soon as it was movie offers, the community said, "Oh no, you're not going to put that on the big screen."
Hmm.
And so there was this restriction. So but it gets back to this whole idea in terms of, okay, if you are a writer, um, are you going to expose family secrets? I'm thinking of the character, in terms of the relationship between Francis and Claire, because it seems like Francis goes upstairs, and she's writing, and see, like, maybe even
Right.
Claire doesn't even know she's writing.
Right. Right. So, the thing is about there's, such a distinct difference between writing a memoir and writing fiction.
Hmm.
You know, the great late novelist James Salter, I once heard him say at a reading when someone asked him that question. I loved his answer. He said, when you're writing fiction, it's like scrambling eggs. You have on one side, you've got imagination. On the other side, you have lived experience or memory. You throw them together, you mix them up, you beat the eggs, you scramble your eggs, and you can never separate the strands again.
Well, Woody Allen always says we need the eggs at the end of Annie Hall. We need the eggs. We need the eggs.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
let's go from Claire and Francis and Rose. Talk about Lou. What type of man is he? And was it difficult for you writing about him?
No, it wasn't difficult for me. I've known men like Lou of that generation. Um, so yeah, let's talk about Lou. So I have a lot of sympathy for the character Lou, even though Francis does not. Um, Claire does. So money, I just want to say money plays an important part in this book because
Hmm.
Rose earns significantly more money than Lou.
Hmm.
And in the early part of the book, there's a section where Rose is talking to her older brother about this proposed marriage. And she's very clear about the fact that they've discussed the differences in their salaries. And he's okay with her putting money towards an engagement ring, so long as
Hmm.
she's happy. And he's okay with her going back to work after she has children, after they have children, so that she can continue to earn. So that seems to be fine. So she's confident about that. But even though it's not explicitly stated in the book, it is something that bothers him. And
Well,
it
you
comes
you
out.
have you have two instances in that book. One is where they're in church, and they look, he wants to put $1, and she gives him like a $20 to put in the thing. Then you have a situation where she gets paid, and she's giving him an allowance. He's
That's
not like
right.
Lou is a kept man.
Right. And then there's the incident about buying the piano.
Right, right.
Right.
And then you also you said you knew people like that. You always fleshed out like he's also involved in terms of civil rights and labor and things of that sort. And so it seems that he's a very complicated person. And then when you look at what you also have in this book, I think his father committed suicide. So you have this thing where you have described Lou in such a way that I felt here was an individual who's fighting bouts of depression.
That's right. Exactly. And the girls, well, Frances never really learns about the grandfather's suicide. Claire learns about it as a college student. So all the time that they were growing up, they could not understand their father's change in mood, the changes of his moods. Um, and she learns that and gains even more sympathy than she had previously for him when she learns the story about how her
But
father
that goes to
died.
my point. That seems like that would be something that would be oh, your father just died or something like that. They would not. There's a generation that would not say that. Oh, your father was depressed. It was not saying, oh, your father committed suicide. No, he just went off and he got trapped in the car and he inhaled a fume. They didn't want to say suicide.
Right. That's right.
You know. Well, Lou has a brother.
And I just want to say, and in that
Okay.
generation, they didn't go to therapists. At
Right.
least, I
No,
mean,
they go to
working,
therapy.
middle class people, working people didn't go to therapists.
Right,
They were
right,
given
right.
pills. They were given
Right.
pills, right?
Right. When you say that, my mother had her own problem, but I always remember my sister and I who was saying like, man, got your mother. Our mother went to the doctor, and the doctor gave her these pills. It's like a new mom. We should have gave her this like 30 years ago, you know, you know, because you would also, you weren't diagnosed.
Right. You weren't diagnosed. That's right.
Yeah. Well, talk about before we go to a break, and I want you to come back and do some readings from the book so people hear what
Hmm.
you've written. Talk about Lou's brother, Francis, who's married to Allison, who's like this thing like this. She's a totally different type of woman in the book.
Okay, so it's not Lou's brother, it's Rose's brother.
Rose's brother,
Yeah,
right?
Rose's
Francis,
brother
right,
is married to
right,
Allison, right?
right,
So the little bit that we know about the brother, whose name is Francis, which is why the sister of Francis is named Francis.
right.
That brother
I had to check the
Francis,
spelling when I'm reading. I had to check the
right,
spelling.
right. So that brother was the star of Rose's family. He was the eldest
Hmm.
child and became a professional, became an economist and a professional, and was traveling in the upper echelon circles, economic circles of their hometown. Um, and she's so different from Rose because she is someone who, went to college, studied dance. It's not explicitly stated that she went to Bennington, but that there are hints that she went to Bennington. And
That's when it was all women, I guess, too.
yes,
Yeah,
right. It would have been in the 30s
yeah.
and or early 40s. And she's a dancer, she's going to open her own dance studio and comes from a wealthy family. And this is sort of like an occurrence, a phenomenon for Rose because there's no one in her context, in her family or in her group of friends who is like Allison. So she's a cipher. Allison is a cipher for Rose. She
Mm-hmm.
doesn't quite understand how all this works,
Mm-hmm.
how someone could be so well off that they would take a chance in opening a dance studio as opposed to whatever, becoming a secretary or something else that's more
Mm-hmm.
stable.
Before we take a break, I want to ask you this last question. Um, if I was teaching your novel, The Vanishing of Rose B, it seems like this would be an excellent novel to place like in women's studies or, what books would you see as companion books that deal with similar themes that you deal with?
That's a good question. I need to think about that because let me think about that.
Okay, so this one. We'll
Mhm.
take a break while you're
Sure.
thinking about it.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay,
all right,
good. All right.
okay. My guest this morning is Nancy Garruba. I really enjoyed talking with her, and she is the author of a new novel, The Vanishing of Rose B, a book that's published by Serving House Books, located in Raleigh, North Carolina. The show's On the Margin. My name's Ethelbert Miller. This is WPFW 89.3 FM.
Peace! This is your social justice calendar for the week of Monday, November 10th, 2025. Thursday, November 13th at 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. There will be a general info session of the work Harriet's wildest dreams is engaged in. If you're interested in building a better world free from patriarchal violence, free of harm for queer people and people of color, this is what this event is all about. They will reimagine what this world can be and reclaim safety for all of DC. For more info, visit harrietsdreams.org. On Sunday, November 16th, from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m., Haile Garima and Sankofa Video and Books will hold a space of artistic expression and protest, featuring a special musical performance by Munit Mesfin, located at Sankofa Video Books and Cafe on 2714 Georgia Avenue, Northwest Washington, D.C. For more info, visit sankofa.com. WPFW's Social Justice Calendar connects you to grassroots activism in the DMV. Submissions can be emailed to socialjustice@wpfw.org. Please include the name, date, and address of the event. This is due by Thursday at 5 p.m., at least 1 week in advance of your event. WPFW's Social Justice Calendar helps build a better world, one broadcast at a time.
Okay, we're back on the margin with my guest, Nancy Garruba. Nancy, I would like you to read from The Vanishing of Rose B. You know, there's a section here on page 42 where we have, I think, the viewpoint of Francis.
Okay, sure. And also, at some point later, let's get back to your question. I have an answer.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Well, why don't
All
you
right.
give us
So,
the answer now first, and then we'll
oh,
go into
okay.
the
All
read.
right. So, I would say that this would be a good companion to what I consider a masterwork, the Neapolitan Quartet, My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. Because in those books, um, you see the struggles of the two main characters, the two women main characters, and their feelings, their thinking, their feelings are pretty much unfiltered in the way the characters are portrayed. Um, so I would offer that quartet.
Yeah. Let me, I know you have this expertise. If we were taking a tour to a museum, are there any paintings where you see your characters?
Okay, I need to think about that now.
Okay, all right. Because
That's a good
I know
question.
you have a very good knowledge of paintings. That's why I was
That's a
just
good
curious.
question.
Okay, so
Okay, so
let's have a a reading excerpt. Yeah, and
all
you can
right.
set it up in terms of what our listeners are hearing.
So what's happening here is that the two sisters are taking a break from the portrait sessions that they've been having, where Claire, the photographer, has her sister pose wearing their mother's clothes because she's trying to capture something about her mother that she was never able to capture when her mother was living, and she would make photo portraits of her. So they've had a session, they've had their dinner, and Frances, the sister who's posing, tries to engage her sister with memories of their family when they were growing up, and the other sister, Claire, is really not interested in doing so. So Frances has gone back to her room, to the same desk that she used to write her term papers on when she was in high school, and she continues to write in her journal. So she's thinking of a memory uh, from when the two were small girls. Another Sunday, another season. Another story Claire will clearly not want to hear. We were in our bedrooms, dressing for church. He raised his voice. Something about a wrinkle in his shirt. What's the matter with you? We've been married long enough for you to know how I like my shirts ironed. She said something I couldn't make out. Then the sound of a slap. It was as if lightning had struck the house, or a tree crashed to the roof. Then a profound stillness, broken one eternity later by footsteps. They were going down the hall, the stairs. I walked out from my bedroom, Claire from hers. We looked at each other, said nothing. As we walked down the stairs, got into the car, and drove to church, I was careful to not look at Claire or Rose. Not until an hour later, after the consecration, did I summon the courage to turn and saw the side of Rose's face that had been slapped, red hot. It was hard to predict when our father would lash out, although at some point I began to understand. It was when Rose stood up for herself. It was when Rose talked back that Lou turned abusive. He could be the merriest of men, the most charming and playful, but that was only if you played by his rules, and his rules were always changing. As the years went on, it got worse. She'd hesitate to say what she needed, what she wanted, what she meant. She might be incorrect or demanding too much. She'd back down, retract, retreat. Her sentences confused us, confused him. First it was this, then it was that, then it was this. I once asked her when their troubles began. College. We were alone in the kitchen during one of those few times I came home, the only time she didn't invade me. Well, when was the first time Dad became angry, really angry? Something my father said made him angry, she said. We were eating dinner there. You and Claire were infants. My father wasn't against labor unions. It was just that he didn't go along with some of the things they did. He didn't say anything while we were there, but when we came home, he blew up. This was right after I'd put you and Claire to sleep. He said my family had too much, that we forgot where we came from, what it was like to be poor. I said he didn't understand my dad, and that only made it worse. So then I said my dad was wrong. I didn't want you and Claire to wake up. Plus, I didn't want the neighbors to hear. It was summer and all the windows were open. What else could I do? After that, it became a pattern. He'd lose his temper, and I'd say anything to calm him down.
Listening to Nancy Garruba reading from her novel The Vanishing of Rose B. Nancy, when I listen to what you just read, it seems as if within households there's this silence that it's a silent agreement, between the twins. But then we're also dealing with the outside. What will the neighbors hear if people are arguing? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes,
Yeah, I
right.
was just wondering about
Um,
that.
I can only speak for yeah, you were frozen a little for a second. No,
Yeah,
it's
right.
okay.
Okay. Hmm.
Yes, that is something that I grew up yeah, but people, we were living in and that comes from my own experience of living in um, inner city, uh, small houses packed together, row houses,
Right.
um, where you knew everyone's business. I mean, you just knew, and so
Right.
in
Right.
the summer when the windows were open, you had to
Right.
mind yourself, right.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
There was
What
a
does this
closeness there that was nice in
right?
many ways, but not so nice in others.
Right. What does your book, The Vanishing Rose B, say about marriage? It would appear that it is not for everyone, and that women make too many sacrifices when it comes to their own happiness.
So, yes, that is very much a part of this book, that there are many sacrifices to be made. And you can say that is the same for the husbands as well. But within a society that is still strongly patriarchal, as I see it, and the way I think it affects women, not all women, of course, but many, the women who are affected by it, is that they they're diminished. They're diminished. Somehow their role, they end up often doing much more if they're working outside the home. They're also minding the children and running a household. Um, and that is a strain on them. But also in terms of voice, when a woman is constantly um, facing a loss of some dignity out in the broader world, um, it's hard to maintain it in the home. It's
Mm,
constantly, we're constantly being minimized, our dignity or our self-value minimized out in the world. And it does enter into the home.
mm. Let's have a second reading, a second excerpt there on page 63. I wanted you to share with our listeners.
Okay, here we go. So this is a nightmare that Frances has on the night before she leaves her sister to go back to her life. We were children, riding in the back of the car, the white Ford. They were up front. We were on our way home from the beach, alone on the road that runs through the pines. They were arguing. All of a sudden, he stopped the car, turned off the ignition, told her to get out. Find your own way home, he said. It was raining. Rain pelted the roof. She looked at him and didn't move. I said, get out, he said. She opened the door and got out. He reached across the seat, grabbed the door handle, and slammed the door shut. She put her hands on the window next to where I was sitting, palms flat against the window. He stepped on the gas and drove off, and the car lurched forward so fast we almost fell out of our seats. I turned and watched from the back windshield. There was nothing for her out there. I knew that. No shops, no gas stations, no place to ask for help. Her figure grew smaller and smaller, then disappeared.
Here's Nancy Garruba reading once again from The Vanishing of Rose B. You know, one of the other things or themes I've seen in the book, like you have this line here, find your own way home. The sense of place, home, the location, which many times, a person um, moves, and so that a home has a certain memory. And talk about this whole thing of memory and writing because that's I think memory is very important as a theme in your novel.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, memory is pretty slippery. We see that as we listen to accounts by Frances first and then Claire. They don't remember incidents in the same way. And it's hard to know whether they sincerely have different memories or whether they, over a period of time, have adjusted their memories, whitewashed their memories so as to fulfill a story they prefer to tell themselves. So, an example would be when Frances tells a story about telling their mother that she needs to get a divorce. She says that the two of them, the two sisters, confronted their mother one morning before going to school and said, "We think you should get a divorce."
Mm,
Whereas when Claire tells the story, she says, "Frances thought they should get a divorce and I didn't agree." And she watched Frances go up to their mother and say this, but she couldn't hear what they were saying. So
mm,
completely different memories of the same incident.
mm,
Um, and there are other areas where they also have very different stories. There's there's a violent incident one spring evening that involves that pink pillbox hat, and they have very different memories of that evening.
mm.
Um,
Well, Nancy
you know,
Gruber,
France, yeah.
how does photographs, because we have a woman who is Claire is a photographer. How does photograph shape our memories, and does it document the people who are missing? And also, what is behind Claire's reason for having her sister dressed like Rose? Is she trying to remember the past or reinvent it?
That's the question that Frances asks. Is she trying to remember or reinvent the past, or is she trying to reinvent me being Frances? Frances is very wary of Claire's asking her to pose as Rose. Um, but yes, the photographs play a large role. So, in particular, before Frances actually arrives to help her sort through Rose's clothes, Claire, a photograph she had never before seen. And it's a photograph of Rose when she was about 17. And she sees Rose as a very young, beautiful, and open, with an open face, and someone who, in the photograph, Rose is opposite a man. We don't see the man, we see his shoulders and the back of his head, but she's listening to a man speak to her. She's always been an attentive listener. That's something that Claire's experienced of her mother. And she sees on her mother's face a quality that she remembers her mother by, but she never captured it herself on film, which is why she wants Frances to pose. And in their third photo session, when Frances tells a story about being on a boat during a flood with an elderly man, Claire claims that Frances looks exactly like their mother in that photograph. So yeah, so that photograph is sort of an iconic image for Claire because it symbolizes the compassionate figure that her mother was, the sympathetic figure that Rose was.
Hmm.
Um, And then all of her other photographs, she admits in the end, they're for her and for Francis. She's never going to show the photographs publicly. They're for her and Francis to remember their mother by.
And when I look at Frances, who's the architect, it seems as if she wants to construct something. She wants to build her own.
She does. She wants to build her own, and she is less interested in preserving family memories. She had family memories. She has left a family. She, moved from the East Coast to California to go to college and never went back other than to visit them from time to time. But she has a very different life. Frances is all about glitz. She's a successful architect. She travels around the world. She and her husband have their own architecture firm. She's a public person. She's not so much a private person. And when she returns home, she's entering a time warp. She's going back to her old bedroom and her old desk, and she's back in time. So she has a lot of the anger she felt when she was a teenager comes back to fill her adult self as she in her during her visit.
Well, it
So
seems as
yeah,
if
as an
there's.
architect, you're right,
Mhm.
she wants to build, she wants to construct something.
Mm.
Go ahead.
Well, it seems
Mhm.
as it's also the thing in terms of the issue of class running through your novel also, in terms
Mhm.
of um, Lou being very much involved in labor, Allison coming in, that there's this sense of that if we're looking at women coming out of for one moving in society, they're moving up and they're also moving up into another class. So getting back to Jackie Kennedy, she represents like Camelot. She represents this sort of regal sort of figure.
Exactly. Right. Rose, so this is where it gets to be interesting, I think, in the book. Rose definitely had aspirations for her daughters. She had reached a certain level. She sort of exited the working class and entered the middle class as a semi-professional and had aspirations for her daughter. She bemoaned the fact that Frances had won a major scholarship and would be leaving home to go to college, but she reveled in Frances's successes. And at Rose's funeral, Rose's best friend tells Frances, every time there was an article about you in a magazine, your mother would call and tell me about it.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas with Claire, when Claire wanted to leave home to open a studio for photography, but in New York, not near where they were living, her mother discouraged her.
Mm-hmm.
So, why was she discouraging Claire when she was proud of Frances, although Frances had not yet accomplished all that, but, it's as though she wanted one of her daughters to be close. So she was pushing one and not pushing the other, pushing one and holding the other back. But there's definitely that need to present success in the world. And when Rose was doing it as a young woman, it was presenting herself as a professional woman and climbing up the pay scale ladder. And she was very proud to see her daughter going beyond her.
Mm-hmm. Why does Frances request that she will pose for Claire only if she can tell stories?
She has seen while they were sorting clothes. Well, when Claire first asks her, she says, you don't have to answer me now. Think about it." And then they go to sorting clothes, and she notices Rose's pink pillbox hat, and she remembers that spring evening of the violent incident, which she had buried in her memory. So she thinks that if she starts to tell stories, then they're in a situation in this photo shoot where Claire will have to listen to the story she tells. And she wants to tell the story of that incident, which is the story that opens the book. And Claire refuses to listen. Claire ends the photo session. She doesn't want to hear that story.
Mm-hmm.
And in the
You,
end, Frances tells that story to herself, dressed
well,
in
there's always
wearing
that
the
question that
pink.
Yeah,
so
it's
much.
always that question that Chinua Achebe raises in Things Fall Apart. Are all the stories true? You know, I mean, that was a question that, I mean, you have two twins, but are all the stories true? Especially when you look at how you have in your novel, um, I think it's Claire who acts as sort of a mediator between Rose and Lou. So she's almost like the UN in the family, which has a totally different perspective of the warring parties, you
Right,
know.
right. Yes, right.
Right.
Yeah.
I was also wondering
Yes.
what would have happened if you had maybe kept both characters, both twins, in the same geographical region. You know, like one's on the West Coast, one's on the East Coast. What if you have narrowed that down in terms of place?
No, I didn't feel I could do that. I needed to have Francis at a great distance from the family
Hmm.
in order to strengthen the fact that she was when she came home, it would always be re-entering a time warp. And if she were
Okay.
close geographically, there would not have been that tension, and I needed the tension.
Okay. Moving from tension, we're going to change the subject because we're coming to the end of our show. But I want you to at least talk a little bit about your other life in terms of your interest in bookmaking history, and also book design. Because you're
Mm.
multi-talented, Nancy Gruber.
Right. Well, thank you very much. So, as you may recall, I came to DC to work at the Library of Congress in the book restoration program. I had been studying and working as a rare book conservator and came to LC for that and worked there for 5 years. And while I worked there, I became very interested. I was handling medieval manuscripts and 18th and 17th century books and became very interested in the history of bookmaking and typography and bookbinding. And so I studied, I read up on all of those subjects and fell totally in love with everything about book design and book production. And um,
Were
and
you
then
were you a
became
paper were you a
involved
paper
with,
were you a paper person? Like, where you touch a piece of paper and you get, it's really ecstatic about a piece, that just the touch and feel of paper?
yes, yes, I do. Yes, yes, I still do. Um, and then I became involved with a group of artists at the Writer Center when they first started, when it was still in Glen Echo. They had a wonderful director of the press there, Kevin Osborne, a DC artist.
Oh, I remember Kevin,
And
yeah.
he invited a group of us to make artist books. He got a grant from the National Endowment, and that's when I made my first artist book. And from then on continued to be so interested, to make other artist books. And in fact, what's going to happen next is that the photographs that I have made that I decided to not include in the novel, I've actually written texts to go with those photographs, and I'm hoping to make an artist book with those photos and text. So I'm still at it.
Wow, I was wondering, whether you we could go back to the beginning of the show. Those other two books, those novels that you sort of hid, is because you couldn't get the proper design or something like that.
Well, that would have been a struggle. I mean, this with this book too is it was a struggle to, but I won't talk about that. But I'm very happy with the cover.
Yeah. Did you help with the design of this book in the terms of the cover and everything?
Only the cover. None of the authors in this press have any say in the typographical design, so I won't talk about that. But one of the joys of this process for me was working in collaboration with a designer. Just going back a sec, I had a graphic design. I headed a graphic design firm for about 20 years after I left the Library of Congress. And
Hmm.
in the last few years of that period, I had a wonderful designer on my staff. And after I left, she and I remained friends. And so 20 years later, I asked her if she wanted to work with me on this book. She said, "You bet." And we collaborated on this book. So the photograph of the sandals is my photograph, and the design
Hmm.
is hers that we worked on together.
Hmm.
And so wonderfully, I mean, I'm so grateful to her for her.
Hmm.
She really made this cover to, she really made an example of Rose's sensibility. This
Right.
cover is Rose's sensibility.
Okay. So do you still walk around with a camera, or you still have this
I
joy of
don't. You
love
know what
of?
I do? I walk around with an iPhone, though, but I do, most of my work is with a camera, which has not been all that much in the last couple of years finishing up this novel. But I work interior and inside with natural light, and I do
Hmm.
mostly still lifes.
Oh, well, we were talking about natural light. We got to make sure that those now that we have the Vanishing Rose B out, get those other two books that have been in the dark, get them out, and we can have another conversation. But Nancy, I want to thank you. I mean, I've always had a lot of admiration for you and follow the things that you're doing, and I was so happy to see that this book was out. Because I know that you work very hard. It's just as you were saying earlier. Sometimes these are 5 and 7 year projects, but at the end of the day, when they come out, we can celebrate. And that's what I hope we did today.
Thank you so
Okay.
much. I've enjoyed our conversation, Ethelbert. Thank you.
Okay. My guest today has been Nancy Garruba. We've been talking about her new novel, The Vanishing of Rose B. The show's on the margin. My name's Ethelbert Miller. The station's WPFW 89.3 FM.